virtual expressions of abundant thought, served with a side of humor. A vibrant, intangible playground for the expression of ideas, concepts, and thoughts, queries, energy, research about synchronicity. With guests, stories, experiences, imagery, magic, awareness, and you. Cool coincidence. Welcome to Cool Coincidence, and I'm your host, Barbara Karnes. The topic for tonight's show is synchronicity chains. For those of you who have not heard that phrase before, I use it to refer to synchronicities that continue on past the original event, whatever sparked that initial event. And sometimes they go on for hours, days, weeks, months, years. Sometimes they tentacle off into side issues as well. For example, I used to, and I still do get a lot of rainbow references, whether it's a photo of a rainbow or references to over the rainbow. The list goes on, and that started in approximately May of 2009. But oftentimes, I'll get a reference such as that, and I'll have them multiple times in a day or in a few days. And then within one of those, I'll have something, let's say I saw it on a show. And within that reference of the show, I'm just making this up off the cuff because I can't think of one other than what I'm going to share a little bit later. And during that show that I'm watching, people are sitting in a car, and it's a certain kind of a car, and they reference the type of stereo. And then I turn my attention to something else, and I see that stereo. Then I see another stereo, and then that stereo plays a song, and then I hear that song, and that song, I hear it on YouTube and on the radio, and then, my son brings it up or something like that, and then that one leads to another one and another one. Those are what I call synchronicity chains, and that will be the primary topic for tonight. We're also going to listen to a series of stories of coincidence that a good friend of mine named Jim Clausen shared with me from a post that was put online just a couple of days ago on the 1st of March by WBEZ Chicago on a website called This American Life. It was episode number 489, and WBEZ Chicago is part of the Public Radio International show. So those will be fantastic. I've broken that. It's in about 57 minutes, and I broke it into 7 different pieces. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to all of them this evening, but we'll just take it as it goes. That's my favorite way of doing things. The first thing I wanted to share with you were some of the things that happened to me this week. And what's funny is, right seconds before I was starting the show, I had a synchronistic event that happened. I'm trying to actually post it online right now. Let's see if I can get it online on the Facebook page. I'm going to photos. It was actually I was going to Facebook, and I wanted to post on the Collective Imagination page that the show was going to go live in like 2 minutes. And in the process of searching for the Collective Imagination, I actually got an interesting pop-up that had nothing to do with the search term that I was listing. Give me just 1 second here. Let's see if that's it. This is 37. Edited. Choose. And let me say this goes with I'm posting right now as we speak, live on the air. Let's see, I call it Give Source a Task Today. Goes with my Give Source a Task Today post from yesterday, which was 3/6/13. Okay, I just posted it. And it is a photo of my screenshot where I was typing in the collective imagination, and the third entry down was called Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Now, if you go back to the post that I placed for Give Source a Task this week, the task was spin me a rainbow. And I've had a number of rainbow sightings and references, nothing that I felt was so over the moon or over the rainbow that it was worth posting in there, except I heard just within a few minutes after posting this, I actually got an audio reference. And that audio reference is actually posted as a comment under the Facebook post, Give Source a Task Today. For anyone who wants to know where I'm referring to, I'm on the Facebook page, facebook.com/coolcoincidence. And each Wednesday, I've been typing Give Source a Task Today, and then I put in what my task is, what I'm looking for Source to share with me that day. And I've got a beautiful picture shared by a good friend of mine, Rhea Stover. She took this great picture a few years back with her and her friends as they were riding motorcycles. It had just rained, so the pavement is nice and reflective, and it's a gorgeous shot of a rainbow over our cornfield in Indiana. But let me play that little snippet from the movie Safety Not Guaranteed. This movie was, as I said, I was watching it on Netflix just moments after I posted this post on Facebook yesterday. And this was a movie about time travel. And the main character is a woman who's a reporter for a newspaper who's trying to track down a guy who wrote a classified ad looking for someone to time travel with him. And they're in a car. He doesn't know she's a reporter. And this conversation ensues.
Do you have a favorite song? Would you tell me what it is?
Stupid.
What is it?
Over the Rainbow.
It's a really beautiful song.
I love it when you live in a world of synchronicity. So that was one of many that I received, and I got the one right before the show. So Source responded and spun me a couple of rainbows, which was really pretty cool. I also posted a link to 8 short stories with synchronicities in them that you will really love. This week's shared sync is called Keys, Please. What I'm looking for is anyone who take a look at this photo, and during the next week, if you have any synchronistic event with respect to this photo, it could be anything. It's a photo of a doorknob with keys in it, and let us know. Post a comment there on the Facebook page. Come and call into the show and share your story, or send us an email at coolcoincidence@gmail.com. Now, last week's shared sync was called Origami City, and I posted an image of just an interesting image of origami in kind of a more candid setting. It looks like it's an Asian city. It's a cartoonish with a couple of characters that have bubbles on their heads and such. And to be honest with you, I did not get anything that was origami specific. The closest I could say that I got, and I wouldn't normally call this a sync, but I like to report everything, is surprisingly in a number of Netflix movies I watched that were, completely English, they just would break out in Japanese or Thai or various Asian languages, which I thought was kind of cool. Not a direct hit, but here's what I would like to share with respect to this. You can ask for a lot of things. You may not get all of your hits when you think you will. This might take a while for the synchronicities to find their way back to me. They could be forming right now. I could also tell you that I did not meditate as much this week, nor did I give myself as much me time. When I say me time, I'm referring more to just giving myself moments of quiet. I do have a 24-year-old son who recently came home, and that takes my attention in a completely different direction. So that could be some of it too, because I do find that when I have time to really go in is when I trigger the energy field or however they work, where synchronicities just come in a flow. I wanted to also remind everyone that if you, in addition to the Facebook page at Cool Coincidence on the Facebook, facebook.com/Cool Coincidence, and our email address of coolcoincidence@gmail, I do have a website that is just a stagnant page. It is a timeline of a synchronicity, which is actually a synchronicity chain. And we will be going there and talking about that a little bit later in the show. That is at coolcoincidence.com. I also am going to try at some point to add a blog to that. But to be honest, I've just got so many embers in the fire right now that I'll get to it, but it isn't one of the top priorities that I have. Now let me share a couple of other really cool synchronicities that happened. I have a friend, her name is Maureen, and Maureen posted an image on Facebook, and I saw that image, and then just a few minutes later, again, it must have been either breakfast, lunch, or after work. I work from home, but that's usually when I, try to grab a little bit of entertainment, which is usually Netflix or something online. She posted an image, and it said, "I don't do mornings," with a picture of Betty Boop. And right after that, I went to Netflix. I was watching Law and Order SVU, episode 12 of season 1, and about it was probably about 2/3 of the way through the program, there was a woman who was a Russian escort who said the following:
"I'm not what you call a morning person."
So for me, that wasn't a direct hit, but it was close enough, especially since it happened just moments after the other one. And Maureen and I have a really good connection, so whenever we hook up in any kind of a way, there's always some fun that ensues from there. I also had another one that, again, these are a lot of just, I'll call them flybys, where they're not direct hits and they're not major synchronicities, but they're the fun things that constantly happen throughout my day. I like to bring these up as well because we all have them. I just think that we don't always take note. I had finished or was finishing watching a movie called Daydream Nation, and in that movie there was a scene where a young high school girl is over at her teacher's house. He's just written the first draft of a novel. He's asked her to read it, and she's thinking the words out loud. And as she's thinking them, they actually just appear across her face because she sees one of the characters is written after her. And he called her an ethereal young woman. Moments later, after I finished that movie, I was back on Netflix watching a different episode of SVU. And let me see if I think that was season 1, episode 12. And Olivia, the character who plays the detective, Olivia, I don't know her detective's last name, she also has words across her neck and chest. And again, because they were back to back, I just find that really cool. One of the funnest ones that I had this week was with Lisa Harrison. Lisa and I also have so many synchronicities whenever we're connected again in any way, whether it's emails or Skype, or she hears something on my show, I hear something on one of her shows, and we're constantly laughing about it. So on the 28th, which I think was like last Wednesday or Thursday, I Skyped her just a quick hello, and I said, "Just saying hi," and I chose one of those emoticons that's sticking its tongue out. And when I did that, she wrote back and wrote hi. And that was really it. It was just, touching base, letting her know I was out there, she doing the same. And then I went off to watch an episode of Nip Tuck. This must have been around 9:30 at night. And the minute that I turned it on where I'd left off the last time, there was, I'm trying to think of his name, Oliver Platt was the actor who played the character named Freddie. And Freddie sticks his tongue out at one of the other, characters in the scene, and he puts his fingers in his ears and, does that little childlike thing, na 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 na. So again, it was seconds afterwards, and I just cracked up because I had just sent Lisa the same, sticking my tongue out kind of thing. I have so many more, but what I thought I would jump to was the first of the audio clips from the public radio stations. Hang on a second. I just want to get back to my notes here. Give me 1 second. Oops. Have a lot of windows open. One of the clips from This American Life. Again, this is a woman named Sarah Koenig, and she's with WBEZ Radio in Chicago, which is a part of Public Radio International. What they did was they started contacting people who were sending them stories that were about coincidences. And once they got a few of them, they realized that this was kind of an interesting topic, although they really couldn't do a complete show because each show has a theme. So what they decided to do instead was to ask people to send in their stories. And I think she said they had about 16,000 come in. I have on my to-do list to try and reach out to them and see if I can hook up with them in some way, just to get some, maybe get them on the show or have them share some of those with me that were not put online. But what they did was they called these folks on the phone, and then they just archived all of these interviews, and they strung them together in a series of short programs that equated to about 57 minutes. So this is the first one in that series. I will put in chat while this is playing the link to these audios so that you can listen to them yourself if you would like to. But this is the first one. It runs about 12 minutes, and I'll see you on the flip side.
This is Hannah.
Oh, hi, Hannah. This is Sarah from This American Life.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good.
Before we go any further, from WBEZ Chicago, it's This American Life, distributed by Public Radio International. I'm Sarah Koenig, sitting in for Ira Glass. And you're about to hear this story the same way I did, blind. All I know is that it's going to have a coincidence in it. I have no idea what you're about to tell me, so
okay.
Lay it on me.
So the story is, I was a freshman in high school at Bozeman High School.
In Montana.
Yes, I was in the orchestra, and it was early in my freshman year, and I had made friends in high school but didn't really have orchestra friends yet, and we were taking an orchestra trip, so that was a little nerve-wracking.
When you're a freshman, this qualifies as a demi-crisis. A long bus ride to Seattle, sharing a hotel room with someone you don't know. But there's this one girl, Lindsay. She and Hannah have friends in common, so they decide to pair up, to room together, ride the bus together, to be orchestra friends.
So we go to Seattle, and we're like, it's awkward, because we're like new friends trying to get to know each other.
Right.
And on one of our free days, they send us to the Space Needle.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if you've ever been to the Space Needle.
I
but
have.
There's that like carnival area all around it.
Uh-huh.
And we were playing the little games all around there, and we won Poopa Troopers. Do you know what those are?
No.
Okay. They're like the little plastic soldiers that have a plastic parachute. And you're supposed to drop them from somewhere, and the plastic parachute sort of expands. And
what did you call them?
Poopa Troopers.
Really? I didn't quite believe Hannah about this, but she looked it up. It's true. Poopa Troopers.
I just did a Google image search for Poopa Troopers, and I'm seeing images of the little guys.
But wait, is it a generic name or is it the brand name?
I think it's a brand name. I think from what I'm seeing here, Imperial Poopa Troopers, maybe?
His Highness, 4-star General Poopa Trooper?
Yes, exactly.
Back to the plot here. Hannah and her new friend Lindsay go to the top of the Seattle Space Needle to try out their prizes.
So we got in the little elevator and ran to the top and ran to the edge and threw the Poopa Troopers over the edge because there's nothing to stop you really.
Yeah.
And we were just like in peals of laughter, and we thought it was so hilarious, and it sort of broke the ice in our friendship.
Lindsay and Hannah become best friends all through high school. Cut to senior year, 4 years later, another orchestra trip, this time to Reno, Nevada. Hannah and Lindsay are in their hotel room studying.
And so Lindsay and I are both sitting at the desk in this hotel room in Reno, Nevada, and a Poopa Trooper comes flying out of the sky and lands on the windowsill of our hotel room where and we both, like, we couldn't believe it. We opened the window and we grabbed the Poopa Trooper and we ran into the hall to try to, like, find other people in our orchestra. Like, we thought someone had been playing a trick on us, but no one knew what we were talking about. No one even remembered the thing in Seattle. And so I still, to this day, don't know why that happened.
Every once in a while, we get pitches like this at the radio show, coincidence stories. And since they don't really fit into our usual every week we bring you a theme format, we've been setting them aside, wondering what to do with them. They mean so much to people.
I don't know. It felt like it was about our friendship. It felt, I'm not someone that believes in God, really, but it felt a little bit like an act of God or something, like just sort of cosmic and larger than us.
Finally, it hit us. If we got enough of them, we could put them on the radio as their own thing. So we put out a call to listeners. Send us your coincidence stories. And you did. Hundreds and hundreds of you did. We read at least 1,300 coincidence stories, interviewed dozens of people. Here are just a few things we've learned. You're most prone to coincidences when you're young, teens or 20s. Lots of coincidences involve your grandmother. You're likely to experience a coincidence if you're in or near the Netherlands. Coincidences also happen to you in or near airplanes or on Craigslist. For many of you, coincidences were the answer to your prayers or helped you find your missing bike. Also, there are coincidences hidden in your name, your keys, your clothes, your address. Like when Flora and Rogaciano Pena first started dating.
When we met, he said that he was born in Salmonelli, and I said, well, I was too. And then when we were going to get married and we needed our birth certificates, we compared them, and it was the same building.
We heard stories about a lost roll of film discovered, coincidentally, in the stomach of a decomposing hyena, about the man who got his favorite T-shirt back from a stranger's knapsack in Slovakia, about the woman who was dating not one, but two Mark Steven Andersons at the same time, about the student whose car broke down in rush hour on a busy highway, and the one person who just happens to stop who comes to her rescue. It's her dad, who lives 4 hours away. And one of my favorites, from a woman named Jill Peterson, who felt nauseated on the subway in New York City. As they pull into the 2nd Avenue stop, there's a garbage can perfectly positioned to help her out.
So the train doors open, and I'm beelining it for this can. And as I get there, out of the corner of my eye, I kind of see, like, another person heading my direction, kind of like going for the can, too. And, it's all coming up, and I'm throwing up. And as I'm throwing up in this can, this person that was coming towards me starts throwing up in the can, too. And we're both, like, simultaneously barfing into this can into the subway station. And we kind of look at each other like, whoa, I don't know, how are you feeling? And she's like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit better now. I'm like, me too.
What's the only way to survive throwing up in front of a subway car full of strangers? Have a nice girl your age do it with you. And numbers. So many coincidences with numbers. One woman told us how she was at Thanksgiving with her extended family, and they suddenly realized that 6 of them had the exact same number of letters in their names. 23 letters.
Michael Arthur Van de Putty, Mary Elizabeth Van de Putty, William Arthur Van de Putty.
There was a guy at the mall doing surveys who had to ask people their phone number. It's obvious the guy who's surveying starts to make up a number. He says 933-456.
When he read off that last number, he said 8, and I kind of stepped back for a second, but I was cool, and I said, no, sir, I'm sorry. That's not your phone number. And he said, well, why isn't that my phone number? And I said, because that's my phone number. That's my phone number. The phone number that you just made up is actually my phone number.
These stories reminded me of an old Chinese saying I once heard. Actually, I learned it a couple weeks ago, and I have no idea how old it is. But it goes like this.
不巧不成书.
That's my friend Yuan Yuan Di.
不巧不成书.
And what does it mean?
If there's no coincidence, there won't be stories.
No coincidence, no story.
To imply that, of course, lives are all, developed in the ways that we can't predict.
So is it like if you heard a story with a coincidence, afterwards you might be like, no coincidence, no story, like that?
That's right. Yes, just expression you use to quote.
Is it like a corny thing to say?
Mostly, I think, no, it won't be a corny thing to say.
Do you ever use it?
When I'm corny, yes.
At the risk of being corny, I'm going to say it. Today's show, no coincidence, no story. While the big man's away, Ira's on vacation, we're going to sneak these coincidence stories onto the air. All the stories you'll hear today, they are verified, true stories that my colleagues hid from me until the actual interviews, so it wouldn't spoil the surprise, which is why there is so much unprofessional giggling this hour. And full disclosure, I came into this topic a coincidence skeptic, or rather believing that a coincidence is just a coincidence, nothing more. I judged, I confronted weakness, I countered wide-eyed faith with statistical probability, and by the end, well, stay with us. Act 1, Grandmas. Blake Oliver is living in Nicaragua right now. We talked on Skype. About 4 months ago, he was on the phone to his friend Camille, who goes by Cammy. He mentioned to her that the screensaver on his iPhone had been the same picture for a long time, that he wanted to change it.
So I asked her to just send me a picture of something. And it was really funny. She ended up sending me this picture of her as a little kid as a joke. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's kind of funny. It was like not what I was expecting, but that's funny. And then I glanced back at the picture, and I saw my grandma walking through behind her.
What?
Yeah. How crazy is that, right?
Very crazy. The picture was taken about 18 years ago. But you recognized her right away.
Oh, absolutely. There was no question that was Grandma Joyce. It was without question Grandma Joyce.
Coincidences like this one usually have a dense nest of details to bolster the craziness. Here goes. Blake is from Michigan. That's where he met Camille. But Camille's family isn't from Michigan at all.
They're originally from Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah.
That's where she grew up?
Yeah, that's where she grew up.
Was this photo from Utah?
No, and that's the funny thing is my grandma lives in Melbourne, Florida. And I'm thinking, oh, she must have been in Utah and walked past it. And Cammy's like, no, that picture was taken in Parksville, Vancouver Island in Canada.
What?
Yeah, right?
Blake figured out that at the same time that Cammy and her family were on vacation in Vancouver, Grandma Joyce had gone there to visit some of her husband's relatives.
Like, what are the chances to think that not only did I meet Cammy, but she sends me this picture of her in the background of my grandma?
I don't know what the chances are. Minuscule.
Right?
Yes.
And not only, like, I don't know if you've seen the picture, but not only just in the picture, but, like, perfectly behind her.
At that moment, a fellow producer emailed me the photo, and there it was. Cute 4-year-old Cammy in the foreground, facing the camera, and not far behind her, a blonde woman walking past, wearing blue shorts and a matching top.
Yeah, and she has no idea she's in the picture even.
Yeah, right. It's not she doesn't seem aware. But I have to say, it's a little, it's not a very crisp photo. Like, I'm sort of surprised you would recognize her right away.
Well, yeah, there's not a lot of, it's my grandma. I don't know, it's like, it's like,
That's part one, guys. I wanted to mention, I think it was Stephanie said, there are no coincidences. And I originally thought you meant you weren't hearing any in that clip. But I think what you were really saying was there are no coincidences, that these things actually happen for various reasons. And I agree with you 100%. I also like what you said about referencing them as subconsciously we recognize each other on frequencies or vibrations, and that, my dears, are not coincidence, but being enlightened. And I'm with you. I think there are lots of different kinds of synchronicities. I think some are deliberate attraction or law of attraction, whichever way you perceive that, where you're sending out requests or information and you're getting back what you're looking for, positive or negative. I think that some are energetic frequencies, just having fun. The synchronicities that I have just crack me up, and most of them don't mean much. I get some that are extremely powerful, and I've shared some of them here on the show, and I will continue to do that. But some of them are just plain fun, and I guess it's because, I'm looking for just plain fun, but they just tickle me. And I also think that we do have this energetic frequency around us all the time. I do different kinds of energy work, but nothing like Michael Bunk and Peter Shelton do. When I say I'm doing energy work, I'm doing more making myself aware of the energy field that's around me, focusing on feeling it. And the more I focus on feeling it, usually during a light meditative state, I actually then can feel it. I think it's already out there, but I'm becoming aware of it further and further and further from my skin. Just like you see heat on the roadway, and when it's really hot and you're on a blacktop, it's like that. I also can feel it out from my chest area. Some people call it the heart center. Some refer to it with chakras. I just know it's coming from the center of my chest area, and it's like this rush of joy. And when I feel that, I actually can feel it feet, 6 feet, 12 feet away from my body, but mostly from that direction. When I talk about energy work, I also do it in relation to trying to read energy of animals and, trees and things like that, and people, and when I'm in a line and don't have anything else to do. So I fully support you and agree with what you're saying. I think there are lots of different types of synchronicities, and as I said on last week's show, to me, they're like a doorway. And once you step into it and become aware of them, what direction you go after that is really up to you. There are people who are light workers and people who are into, UFOs, and people who are into time travel, and people who are just into general spirituality and, becoming more aware of the oneness. And, the list is endless. But I genuinely think that becoming aware on a very surface level of coincidences and synchronicities is a doorway that everybody can participate in it, and they do, find it in their daily lives. Where you go after that is totally up to you. Well, let me share a couple of more with you. I've had Diane Armitage. I didn't see her in the room, but Diane sent me an email, or I should say a Facebook message. Let's see if I can get the date on this one. Last Friday. So that must have been the 1st, I think. And she said, hi there. Say, in case you haven't read this article in Kalupe's blog, it is called "Today I Did Not Follow What." See his wild sinks at the bottom of the article. Maybe you want to have him on the show, yes? And I wrote her right back. Well, she wrote it at 5:01. I responded at 7:36. But as soon as I read it, I responded to it and said, LOL, you sent me this message at 5:01, and then I asked for the links at 5:18, and I must have sent them to her in a different way than through this Facebook message. When I went to Facebook a few minutes ago, that article had been posted in the OPPTIN at about 6:30. See the screenshot, and I took a screenshot of it. So she tells me about it, but she didn't give me the link to the article. And I went to her Facebook page, and I didn't see it, and that's where I must have posted my response. Do you have a link to the article you were talking about? And then I go back in, and sure enough, at the very top of my Facebook page, there's that article posted by OPPT. And I got exactly the link that I had asked her for. And I thought that was really kind of funny. I have another one. I just posted this one a few minutes ago on my personal Facebook page. I have a friend, Maureen. Maureen is a psychic. She lives in California. I adore her. She's just the purest form of childlike innocence in an adult that I have ever had the pleasure of having in my life. Maureen's father died a year ago last September, so we're going on, about a year and a half, going on 2 years. She was extremely close to him, and when he passed, I should say a few months before he passed, he got very ill, and she and I had talked prior to that about the experience I had with my mom, who had cancer, and I spent the last 3 months or so with her. I kept my house here in Indiana, or on Long Island, but I went back to Indiana and stayed with her for those months. And we had a conversation about, once you pass, if there's just more, can you find a way to let me know? Now, my mom and I had this discussion off and on for 15 or 20 years. We just couldn't remember what signal we had agreed on because we had talked about so many. So I had shared that story with Maureen over the year and a half before her father passed. And as it was coming closer, I said, listen, I'm not trying to be insensitive, but you remember when I told you about this? You're in the same position now. It's a unique one. And I just wanted to bring that kind of to your attention in case that was something you wanted to explore with your father, if you're comfortable with it and you think he may be. And it took her a while, but she did have that conversation with him. And I believe she actually had it on more than one occasion, but they were always kind of, like skipping rocks. You would just touch on it and move on, touch on it and move on. But after he passed, she said that she kept talking and talking and talking to him, saying, you said, we had this conversation. Please, just show me that you're okay. Show me that there's more. And her niece just had a daughter, which would have been her father's great-grandchild. And they named him Jack after her father. And Jack is just a newborn. And she posted a photo of Jack, the baby. And here's what she said. Let me see if I can actually get her comment. She said, before my dad, Jack, died, I asked him to send me a sign that I would know it was from him. Here is Jack, 4 weeks old, his great-grandson, and this is the message I've been waiting for. It is a picture of a newborn with his middle finger up. And that is exactly the kind of guy that Jack was. He was actually an extremely well-known, entrenched businessman in a variety of fields. I don't think it was oil, but it was something to do with that kind of thing. And so he was a high-level executive and was on a number of board of directors of several corporations. And he would have done it as a joke, And the minute she saw this namesake, a newborn who would have no idea, literally, how to do that on his own, sticks up his middle finger, and as they take a picture, it's priceless. And that was the sign she was looking for. And I absolutely adore that story. And for those of you who want to see it, let me post that in chat. This is actually, let's see if I can, this is Maureen's link, which is a public one. And then I actually reposted it, and I have comments on my personal page, which kind of goes into the story a little bit more. But I thought that was really, really cool. And not only is it a synchronicity for her to have that happen, it really goes along with today's topic of different types of synchronicity stories around the globe and the things that people find themselves having the opportunity to experience. Now, what I thought I would do before I actually go into tonight's topic, which is synchronicity chains, I thought I would play one more shorter excerpt from The American Life. And this one's only 6 minutes. So this is part 2, and I will see you in about 6 minutes.
20 years ago, for my first reporting job, I interviewed a woman who'd just turned 100 years old. I asked her, admittedly, a rookie question. What's the most amazing thing that's happened in your life? She thought for a while, and then she said, the most interesting thing that happened to me was that on my first day at Patchogue School, the principal said to me, what's your name? I said, Esther Tuttle. And he said, I have a friend in Shelter Island by that name. I was 12, she said, and that, to me, was remarkable. This woman had seen the advent of cars and movies and computers and space travel, and this was her answer. At the time, I thought it was lame, that maybe Esther was losing it a little. But since I started hearing all these coincidence stories the last couple of weeks, I've reconsidered. Coincidences feel so rare. They stick with you, even when the coincidence is barely a coincidence at all. An academic study of people's reactions to coincidence stories from the early 1980s found that we have an egocentric bias toward our own coincidences, that people find stories that happen to them far more surprising than the same stories happening to other people. Case in point.
My name is Juliana Bontrager, and I'm 16 years old.
Juliana, she's got a problem with her grandmother.
My grandma has been obsessed with coincidences, and she finds them in her life all the time, and she always wants to tell everyone about them. And we get kind of annoyed with her sometimes because she thinks they're so incredible and how they happen to her all the time, and it's just, it's every time we see her, oh my gosh, you would not believe what happened to me. And they're always, I was at the hospital with, she lives with her cousin, so she takes her cousin to the doctor's office quite a bit for appointments and stuff, and she'll be sitting in the waiting room, and then, they'll drive to go get lunch after that, and they'll see the people they were waiting in the waiting room with at the restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I've always, I always thought that was funny because it's like, yeah, that's a coincidence, but, maybe they're just going to get lunch too. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
So then a while ago, I was doing a project in my English class. We were reading the Scarlet Letter book.
Uh-huh.
And I was, once we finished the book, our, end project was we had to come up with what our sin was or what sin we struggled with the most. And I chose envy. So we had to create our own letter out of paper, and then we had to, safety pin it to our shirt and wear it around school the entire day. So as I was coloring in my letter and cutting it out, my mom was listening to the show Monk in the background.
Mm-hmm.
As we were watching it, I was literally, cutting out my last line on the letter E for envy, and it said on the show, I've studied the 7 sins, and the most prominent one is envy.
Mm-hmm.
As I was cutting out my letter. And so I immediately called my grandma and was telling her about it, and she was like, oh, that's a good one, yeah. And then I didn't really hear back from her after that, and I thought, well, maybe she's just envious of my great coincidence. and I was sitting there are you kidding? Mine was so much better. You just happened to run into a person twice in one day. I do that all the time, What are the odds that as I'm cutting out this letter E, they would talk about that on a show? And I was so confused about it.
Okay, so Juliana's coincidence is a common one. We've all had those moments when you're reading a certain word and then someone says it on the radio or on TV. But remember, Juliana's 16, so maybe this is the first time it's happening to her. Still, I'm on her side here. I think it is more remarkable than her grandmother's example of the people in the waiting room being at the restaurant. Do you have a phone where you can dial up your grandma right now?
I can try.
Try it.
Okay, 1 second.
So Juliana conferenced her grandmother in so we could settle this.
I'm here. Elaine Olson.
Elaine Olson, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, dear.
I laid out my argument for Elaine about the purity and therefore superiority of Juliana's example, but Elaine argued right back. There were several hours between the two sightings, plus the restaurant was about 4 miles from the hospital.
And in that 4-mile radius, you might say, I could have gone to any number of restaurants. The fact that I ran into her at that restaurant, I think, is a coincidence.
I think
she could have gone any place, too.
That's true. I mean, that's true. It's not. I'm not saying it's not a coincidence. I'm just saying it's not maybe as pure as, like, you can break down the sort of probabilities of a certain kind of person in a certain kind of neighborhood.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I think that is.
Do you think you're somehow prone to coincidences? Like coincidences find you more than they find other people?
I don't know. That's why, you know, in my own family, I've asked them, does this happen to you? And don't get, much of a response. But
I've asked impossible to argue with.
Too.
So when you ask for coincidences, we have nothing to give to you because you are so set in your ways.
I'm 81. Okay, yeah, okay.
So what would Juliana have to experience in terms of a coincidence that would impress you, do you think? Like, what would it need to be?
Well, it's hard to tell. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had my cousin up at another doctor's, and sitting in the reception area, gentleman across from me was Asian.
This time it was about an Asian man in the waiting room, whom she later saw buying a melon at Trader Joe's, which Elaine admitted wasn't as good as the other one.
I agree. But you know what's cool about that? That there's some much better ones to come, but I played that one for a reason. I played that one because it's so interesting to me that someone who's 81 finds the the energetic tickle of a cool coincidence, where when she was growing up, I'm sure that anyone who talked about it at any length was probably considered a little wackadoodle. And, nobody wants to be considered to be different, especially when you grow up in a period where a lot of people don't travel around. So you grow up in a certain neighborhood with certain mores, and you either fit in or you don't, unless you grew up in a place like New York or a large city of some other sort where there's, a huge mix of cultures and things. Just talking about it, I think, would be unusual. So I thought it was really cool that an 81-year-old woman is excited about synchronicities. I also thought it was cool that her young, I think it was her granddaughter, was also being introduced to them. Because a coincidence is a coincidence is a coincidence. I didn't even know what the word synchronicity meant until approximately 2009. And I had to look it up, and when they started happening to me with such intensity and regularity, I was like, what the hell is going on here? So, I was in 2009, I was turning 50. So, I would have loved to have had that opening at 16. So that's why I played that one. Plus, I don't care who has what kind. I think they're all neat. I think the girls was cool. I think the grandmas are cool. I think sometimes when you have so many of them, you notice little things that are probably not so much of a coincidence. But so what? Let's just have fun. That's my motto. Well, let's continue on with the show. Again, the subject for tonight is synchronicity chains. I have them all the time. I try to capture as many as I can, but to be honest with you, I've said this to my son, because if you're with me and you're right next to me, I'll say, see? And that's all I have to say. You get it. But if I have to then go back and take screenshots or grab audio or try to find some way to document it, something that took, 1/100th of a second now takes 20 or 30 minutes to, regurgitate in some way. So I don't really put them all in, I don't really catalog them all because I just don't have the capability of doing that. But I do have a couple of places where I have logged them. And one of the most intricate catalogs that I've made, or chronicles that I've made, is on the coolcoincidence.com website. In April of 2012, for a friend of mine, Mary, I'm trying to think, what was Mary's last name? For a friend of mine named Mary who does a show called Truth Travelers, she wanted me to talk about synchronicity, because if you spend any time around me, you find out that I have a lot of them. And for truth travelers, it was an interesting topic for them. So I told her, I'll do you one up. I will just now put out the intent that I'm going to have some really cool ones, and I'll catalog them all for the next few days. I think it was about a week. And my gosh, the floodgates opened, the rivers were pouring over the sides of the embankments, and the synchronicities began, and I ended up creating what I called this timeline of synchronicities, having no idea when I started that is what I was going to create. So on that webpage, if you go to the timeline of a synchronicity, I have a literal timeline, and above it's separated into two sections. The top section is a slide by slide of what happened, and on the bottom you can pick anyone in particular. There are audios there, there are videos there, and so I'll just start from the beginning and let you basically do the rest of the work, because I don't want to go through all of them. But I created a slide called Timeline of a Synchronicity. It's the first one in the series. It actually is also a Flickr photo. And if you look at it, you can see how the synchronicity went through three chains. The first one I called the invisible prince. The first one I called Matter Doesn't Exist. The next one was called Listen to the Mountain. And the third was called Invisible Prince. And I tried to name synchronicities just because it's a lot easier to refer back to them. And if you look at this slide, you can actually see firsthand exactly what happened. I'm actually going to open this Flickr image to the largest one that I can, which is why I actually put it on Flickr so that you could literally make it huge and see it. So it started off on 3/24, where I was watching a video of Deepak Chopra's. The name of the video is called The Major Problem of Science, and he said matter doesn't exist. Then later that same day, I'm watching a video by Lilu Mace, also known as Lilu Mace, on her Juicy Living tour, and that one was called The Importance of Stopping the Mind. And during the course of that video, they also say matter doesn't exist. Well, from that same video, they also were referencing Listen to the Mountain. I can't remember who she was interviewing at the time. Oh, I know what it was. It was a two-part interview, and I decided to listen to the second part. So I went from the first one straight into the second one, where they were talking, the same gentleman was talking about listening to the mountain. And he goes through this really energetic, conscious connection he had with this mountain next to this resort that he built in Mexico. And while I'm watching that one, that was on the 25th of March. Later on the 25th, I also did an I Ching reading, just completely unrelated. Somebody, I think, actually asked me to do an I Ching. They told me about it, and they said, give it a shot. So I grabbed my pennies, and I rolled them out. And my I Ching reading, which is also listed here in this timeline of a synchronicity, shows that it was talking all about listening to the mountain. So then on the 29th of March, I create a book cover. It was the first, it's not actually the one that was ever used. We did a second one that we ultimately used instead. But I realized that it was of a sea to sky book cover. And the gentleman kept talking about, the sea to sky. And so that was part of the Listen to the Mountain, which then went to that actual image I felt was reflected in a photo that was posted on Facebook by Scott Evers, where you literally see these, and I think it was probably the Grand Canyon, you see these gentlemen walking donkeys around a mountain, which is almost identical to the one that I used for the book cover that I did. And that photo is a modified image of the I think it's called what is it called? It's a thoroughfare around between the mountain and the water in Canada. And I can't right now think of what the name of it is, but I felt it was paralleled there. Then I was listening to, just to get a feel for how the Truth Traveler show was going to run, I listened to the show that they'd done the week before, where that woman actually talks about Grand Canyon ghost stories. And that was an image of the Grand Canyon from Scott Evers' photo. Then if you look at the next one is from, it's called The Killing. It's a TV series, season 1, episode 8. And you can see that the T-shirt in there was from the Grand Canyon. And from there, it goes up to, and there are actually a couple of more in there. You can see the book cover design request form that also is part of that, and some prep that I got from Mary that also refers to the mountain and the Grand Canyon and stuff. Then from there, it goes to the Invisible Prince, because it's the Killing series referenced the Grand Canyon, which was then also referenced in a way in the season 1, episode 3. It was called Mount of Clare, but it was all about the story called The Invisible Prince. And while I'm watching that, it's interrupted by a commercial, which was a Disney commercial, which actually showed this little guy at the what's it called, the something mountain at Disney World, and he's got a sword in his hand trying to pull it out of the rock, I think is what it was. And that's the Invisible Prince story, was a little bit about that. And this was a little kid as the Invisible Prince. And then it ended with, it actually continued on, but I ended it with another scene from the Invisible Prince show, where he actually tells the story. He says, once upon a time, there was an invisible knight who served a silent king, and together they helped people they didn't even know were there. And I felt like not only was that talking about, the Invisible Prince, but it was also talking about what I was doing by sharing this story. And to me, that is a sample of a synchronicity chain, where one leads to another, to another, to another, and within each one, there are multiple parts. And sometimes they end and sometimes they don't. But that's an example of one. If you get a chance, go there and you'll be able to watch all the video clips and listen to all the audios and look at all the emails and everything that was associated with that whole range. And I hope you enjoy that. And if that's the kind of thing that you guys like, let me know, because, or if you have similar things, I would love to be able to catalog those as well. I also have had a couple of other synchronicity chains in the last few weeks. One of them had to do with the orchid synchronicity that I posted last week and talked about on the show last week, where I posted a photo of orchids and said, let's do this as a shared synchronicity. And from there, I got a botanical garden, which was just filled with orchids. The photos that I saw were of orchids. So I basically was in an orchid garden. And then I saw a giant organic hybrid orchid garden in a Nip Tuck episode with Alec Baldwin. And from there, the synchronicities continued, and they went from orchids to roses. And I saw collections, because in one of the orchid gardens there was a red, a white, and a yellow rose. Then I started seeing collections, whether they were paintings or Facebook images or emails that had red and white and yellow roses together in bunches or one of each. And it was hilarious to see those. So that was a cool synchronicity chain. And then I had a synchronicity chain with the box cutter synchronicity I had last week. And I have so many of them. I could go on and on. I just don't want this whole show to be about stories of mine, because then it kind of gets a little boring and dry. So I will kind of close on that note when it comes to the theme for tonight. If any of you want to share any synchronicities or chains of synchronicities that you have, please post them in the chat room and I'll read them. Please feel free to call in and we can talk about them. or you can also share them on the Cool Coincidence Facebook page or email them to us at coolcoincidence@gmail.com. So let's continue with part 3 of This American Life and various stories of cool coincidences that others around the world are sharing.
Act 2, In God We Trust. It's probably no surprise that we got a huge number of coincidence pitches about love, romantic love. A few years ago, after Stephen Lee proposed to his girlfriend Helen, they brought their families together for the first time to celebrate the engagement.
My mom and my stepdad came to New York to meet with Helen's parents. And basically, over the course of dinner and coffee afterwards, we discovered that basically my father had dated my wife's mother back in Korea back in the 1960s. And he had proposed to her.
I'm going to slow this down a sec just to let it sink in. Helen's mother had almost married Stephen's father, his late father, actually. He died when Stephen was 17. And how this all came out was that after they had dinner, they went back to Stephen's apartment. They were looking at Stephen's family photographs.
So, my future mother-in-law is flipping through the album, and she sees my dad. And so she asks, what was his name? And my mom tells the name, and, my future mother-in-law kind of just nods and kind of just moves on, keeps on flipping through the book, doesn't even say anything.
Imagine what she must have been feeling with seeing that photo suddenly, just like flooded.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I think she'd be really good at poker.
Right. So Helen's mother says nothing, goes home. But later that night, she tells her daughter, this was the one, this was the man who might have been. She explained that the reason they hadn't married was because her father, Helen's grandfather, had chosen a different husband for her, the man who became Helen's father. All of them ended up living in the U.S., but they quickly lost touch. And Stephen didn't find out about any of this until a couple of days later.
That's when Helen, calls me up and says, I have something to tell you. And she tells me, and I was floored by it. Together we called my mom, and, she put a good face on it. But she was pretty shocked.
Did she know that there had been this other woman that your father had been in love with?
That's the thing. My dad told her years and years ago, there was this other woman that I was in love with at one point, but, long before I met you. But Mom was like, look, you have a past, I have a past, we all have a past, who cares? Of course, never thinking that she was going to share grandchildren with that woman. I mean, she later admitted to me that if she had known this from the very beginning, she would have not supported Helen and me. She would have, it would have just been like, look, being with the daughter of the other woman your dad loved, I mean, it would. Can't you find someone else?
How did you take this coincidence? Did it come to mean anything to you or to Helen?
Yeah. There's something about it, the fact that, I didn't have the time with my dad that I wished I had had.
Yeah.
And then suddenly to kind of have him be kind of an active part of my life again, to think that I can talk to my mother-in-law and hear what he was like in his 20s, something that my mom doesn't even know. And, Helen's father is a strong believer in the idea that somehow my dad somehow is behind all this, that somehow, he's kind of helped make all this happen.
At the time this next love story takes place, a guy named Paul Grachin was working in a Chicago suburb called Arlington Heights. He'd just started dating a woman named Esther. They'd been out maybe 8 times.
And I thought maybe it was time to get exclusive or become boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever it was. And I was about to go out to lunch, and I was thinking about asking her on a Friday date that I had set up. And I went out to lunch. I stopped at the store prior to hitting the deli that I normally hit. And I got some change, went to the deli, ordered my sandwich. It was $6 or something like that. I pulled out a $5 from my wallet, and I pulled out the couple bucks change that I had gotten from the store, handed the clerk one of the ones, and then I looked at it and I pulled it back. Written on the dollar in pencil was Esther. And I thought, oh, that's weird. I'm thinking about asking her to go steady, and I get this dollar that says Esther on it. It's bizarre. So I stuck it in my pocket, chuckled. I went to the store. I got one of those floating frames and a little piece of gold lame, and I stuck the dollar in the frame. So it was floating in the middle on this piece of gold, as if, you're going to go in a church in Italy and they had a fragment from the robe of some saint or something like that. And I called it the Immaculate Dollar of Arlington Heights. So on the Friday, I asked her out, and she was, all excited, and we were all giddy. And then I said, hey, I have one more thing for you, and I gave her this frame with this dollar in it.
I start unwrapping it, and he's like, it's a dollar with your name on it. And he's all, like, beside himself, and I just look at him like, I'm freaked out.
She kind of furrowed her brow a little bit and looked concerned, and I said, is there some sort of problem?
I was speechless for the first time ever, but I said, remind me to tell you something later.
So, okay, I let it go, and we had a relationship, got engaged, we got married. A couple years later, we were unpacking at a new apartment that we had, and I found the frame with the dollar in it, and I stuck it up on the dresser, and she came in the room. I said, hey, you never told me about this dollar. What's the deal with that? She said, well,
when I was 19, I was a cashier working in a copy shop in downtown Chicago, and I was dating someone, and I just wasn't happy with him, and I just thought, how do people know who the right person that they're meant to be with? How do they know who that is? I said, you know what, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to put my name on this dollar bill, and the guy that gets this dollar bill is going to be the guy that asks me to marry him. And I'm like, well, you can't just write your name on one. Actually, I think it was more like maybe 10 or 12. And so this dollar bill that you gave me, I believe is the same dollar bill that I wrote my name on, and I knew that we were going to be married the day that you gave me this dollar bill.
It was pretty crazy.
And then he made me tell him the story again. He asked me like 5 or 6 times. And I said, the details don't change. It's the same story. Like, I think he was a little bit beside himself that actually happened. And that I didn't tell him. I don't know how I found the will to not say anything to him, but I just remember, like, do I, don't I, do I, don't I, do I, what do I do? I don't want to freak this guy out and be like, what? This girl's already talking about marriage? Wait, what? Forget it.
I don't read too much into almost anything, so I just kind of moved forward, and then after she told me, I think I went through all the normal stages of whatever, and I just thought, what does this mean for us? Are we going to invent a time machine, or are our kids going to bring world peace, or like, what's the, like, is there some sort of bigger thing that we're not seeing here? Now it just sits in that very same frame up on our dresser, and I look at it every day that I wake up. Sometimes I remind her that we have it when she's upset at me or angry.
It's never been a question in my mind, like, you know what, I'm going to kick this guy to the curb. But I do believe it's because of this dollar that I feel tied to him. I mean, obviously I love him, but I think that if it ever did cross my mind, I'd be like, but wait, this is my soulmate. I can't just walk out on him. We don't even wear wedding bands. I'm like, why? Just, I know I'm stuck with you. You got this dollar bill. I guess he could also, put it back out into the register and then be like, look, I'm cashing this in. I think it's got to go to somebody else. He could do that.
Paul and Esther Grachin. They've been married for 14 years.
I got a dollar, says I'll be your man.
Those were some cool stories. Oh, I just love that. Well, I have pulled up a series of searches in Google, as I do each show. And this time, I included chain of coincidence. I have searched just during the past week to see what kind of interesting possible results I might get. And it looks like I have I don't have it full screen. Actually, I don't seem to have a total. I don't have a total. Who cares? But I've got some here, and it's kind of interesting. Let's see what they have to say here. Are these chains of coincidence more than a coincidence? And this is actually about the papal prophecy. Is the end near? Now, I don't judge, and I don't make decisions. If I think it's interesting and it has to do with cool coincidences, I just pull it up because you just never know. Now, for those of you in the chat room, I am going to share this link. Here we go. This is the article that I'm looking at right now. For those of you who are listening to this in the archive, I will post this on the in some way on the Cool Coincidence Facebook page. The Papal Prophecy, is the end near? Let me see if I can actually go straight to the section that has the word coincidence in it. There are 3 of them. The lightning strikes over the Vatican at the annunciation of Pope Benedict VI's resignation. Could that have been merely a random occurrence of nature? But was it more than just a coincidence? And it goes on to talk about that. And I think most of us have heard this story, so I won't repeat that. Then at the very end, it says, are these chain of coincidence more than a coincidence? Are the fate of the Catholic churches and perhaps are they the fate of the Catholic Church and perhaps the world? Or has it been merely an overblown hoax? These questions will likely remain unanswered. Only time will tell. That was interesting. Nothing too noteworthy, but it is definitely in the news. And if it wasn't so over talked about already, I would probably go into depth about it. But I hear that everywhere. And I know that the folks that follow Lisa Harrison and her 5D Media Network are already very familiar with that one. So let's see if we can find some other fun ones. Let's see. Can't be a coincidence of a lazy design. He should totally get temporal chains. Well, that doesn't sound like it has to do with the type of coincidence we're looking for. It's no coincidence. Tesco is now following suit. Their supply chains are becoming so long. Okay, well, that's interesting and not worthy of further comment. It is not a coincidence Alberta boasts low taxes. With a profitable base and a refined model, the chains can then spread nationally. So, again, that's not too terribly interesting. So it looks like so far the list of search results for the phrase chains of coincidence are not that striking. Let's see. These 2 independently caused facts. Is there coincidence in time and space? Well, this actually might be interesting. Okay, this article is, Can We Ever Explain Human Tragedy? This is an NPR article. And here's where I'm reading from for the chat. And let's see, sinkholes. Oh, actually, I did hear about this. If any of you heard, there's a gentleman who actually was, I think he was in his bedroom, and a sinkhole absorbed him and his whole room. And the rest of the house, the people got out, and it did not completely go in the hole, but he and his room did. Sinkholes can occur when porous limestone or other soluble bedrocks dissolve in water, creating underground caverns that collapse. Last Thursday evening, a man was in his bedroom of his home in Seffner, Florida. These are typical narratives, one about scientific fact, the other about everyday life. We accept each narrative as neither shocking nor mysterious. Water and rock interact in particular ways. People go about their daily lives. This is familiar. But when these 2 narratives tragically intersect, the result can be shocking and unsettling. And then it goes into the story, which is a little tragic. So I won't go there. I will search for the word coincidence on the page. And it says, we say that the granary collapsed because its supports were eaten away by termites. That is the cause that explains the collapse. We also say that people were sitting under it at the time because it was the heat of the day and they thought it would be a comfortable place to talk and work. There is this is the cause of people being under the granary at the time of its collapse. To our minds, the only relationship between these two independently caused facts is their coincidence in time and space. Well, coincidence and chains don't seem to bring us anything of, let me just zip to this page 2, and I'm going to scan it real quick, because this is supposed to be a fun show. And if it ain't fun, we're going to move on. Message from God or a coincidence. Yellow Dog Patrol. Okay, that could possibly be interesting. My day started with a 45-minute trip to my local hunt club to get a yellow dog out and get her some work. With our recent vacation, I felt guilty of her lack of activity of late and thought the time afield, even through our deep snow, would be valuable for both of us. As I drove up, I listened to the Catholic channel on my stereo satellite radio. With Lent Here, this was March 3rd of 2013. With Lent Here, I've tried to make listening to the station more of a habit, and the programming yesterday morning was very good. The first show was about St. John Bosco and all he was able to achieve. I was deeply struck by the stories of the miraculous dog, Gridio, who saved and protected Bosco in numerous occasions. I thought how incredible it would be to have such a tangible and unmistakable intersection by God in one's life. It was awe-inspiring. As interesting as that is, let's see if we can skip to the words coincidence. Throughout the night, I thought long and hard about it, whatever it is. I developed 3 theories. Coincidence, yes, the odds were incredibly long, but they were greater than 0. With math, anything can happen, even the improbable. Okay? That's interesting, not interesting enough. So I think that I'm going to move from coincidence chains, which didn't render all that much of interest, to the phrase synchronicity over the last week. We've got some interesting ones here. Improved synchronicity, preventative care for the power grid, Synchronicity Earth, Synchronicity Wellness, Asheville, North Carolina, Synchronicity Wellness, Synchronicity or Meaningful Coincidence. Let's try that one. Again, just capturing the URL. I think I'll hold on to this one just to make sure this is an interesting story first. Here's an interesting post on synchronicity from Clay Sellers, whose blog is called Rethinking Complexity, Studying Systems for the Humane and Sustainable World. Last month during my SOJOURN, Shorn, I don't know what a Shorn is, through the amazing, and actually if anybody in chat does, let me know. I have my shorn through the amazing beauty of Sedona, Arizona. I decided to do something I've never done in my life, nor have I ever really wanted to do. I visited a psychic to receive a spiritual reading. For most of my life, I have moved to the world of rigid organization and technology, and that association has never encouraged me to seek the insight of someone who claimed to have a finger on the pulse of the spiritual ebb and flow of life. Oh, journey. Thank you. Maisie Miles in the chat room has said that a shorn is a trip or a journey. Thank you so much. As I sat before this mystic, a Native American, surprisingly down to earth and not at all what one would have expected, the following admission came out right at first. All my life, I have always really wanted to believe in magic, but I have never trusted magicians, I said. Smiling and nodding, she pointed out that most people are skeptics, some more than others, and that she had no expectation and had offered no promises other than to be open, honest, and kind. As the reading progressed, once again, not at all spooky, mystical session laced with uplifting and ominous predictions, she simply talked about my past, my present, and my future. There were none of the clarifying questions I'd seen or heard in so many televised readings, only her declarations about what she felt or believed I experienced yesterday, which was around me today, what was around me today and what I might look forward to tomorrow. I won't ramble on about all that I felt or what I took away, but I want to relay one aspect of our discussion that rang a bell so distinctly I almost believe I actually heard the ringing. As she spoke about my past moving into my present, she declared that I am increasingly touched by synchronicity. I involuntarily smiled, for that word seemed suddenly so appropriate. Harkening back to Carl Jung's concepts, I noted that synchronicity describes events that don't seem to be at all causally related, but when contemplated together, present significance or meaningfulness. Since I'd only the previous week held a conversation with a colleague where we'd earnestly discussed synchronicity, I smiled at the irony in the close temporal and ideological connection between the two discussions. As a now out-of-the-closet systems theorist, I am rarely surprised by connections of all sorts. Connections pervade my worldview and help define how I process purpose and direction and design in life. I often employ that associative concepts that use the analogy of ever-widening ripples caused by tossing a pebble into a pond to describe how a tiny action can have continuing, significant effects. If I then overlay the idea of synchronicity onto those circles, I arrive at an interesting theory of life and its harmonies, ripples of synchronicity. Just for a moment, find a quiet spot, even though that's very difficult to do these days, and consider all the echoes around you, all the events, and even artifacts that hint of harmony. Look at the shapes to which you're drawn, wine glasses and vases and palm tree trunks. Then perhaps listen to the wind and the rhythms that the moving leaves and branches provide. Patterns that reoccur all about you become apparent. After all, look at the skies and the regularity of the clouds and the joyful flow of day and night. Finally, take joy in thinking of the friends and family whose mannerisms you can easily foretell and who finish your sentences, bringing laughter from both of you. These places and sights and souls embody a reassuring synchronicity that brings you both comforting patterns and delightful surprises in ever broader loops and swirls that carry you out from the pebble of birth. And if that isn't magical, perhaps I've missed the point. Wow, that was quite charming. Okay, so that one I actually will share in chat for anyone who wants to follow up. Let's see if this has any way to leave comments. Yes, actually, there are 3 comments. I'm not sure if there are any of interest, but if anyone's interested in leaving a comment there, I highly encourage you to do that. I would love to be able to let these people whose stories we read and share to know that we're out there paying attention. The first one says, well said. The next one said, what an exquisite, beautiful sharing. In the midst of a world of chaos, we need this. Thank you. The last one says, thanks for sharing your experience, Clay. That was actually written by a guy. That's pretty cool. It kind of flowed, didn't it? It just had a nice rhythm to it. This article resonated with me because just a week ago, I sat by the sea and I felt the tide move in and out. I thought of the ripple effects and elemental magic. Later, I wrote about the experience in my journal. I wrote that I believed magic was swirling through my life and about creating positive rippling effects. So your article felt familiar, especially because of the use of the words magic and how it swirls and ripples. So within this article, that article itself created a synchronicity for that commenter. Her name was Vicky. That's pretty cool. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to see if I can find one more because we're rounding to the final half an hour, and I wanted to play at least one more of those clips, if not 2. Lightning strikes. They're talking about the Vatican. Between coincidence and synchronicity, philosophy, and then it gets cut off. Let's see what that is. A look at what the subject entails and the user experiences. Let's see. Hi, apologies if this is the wrong section. I'm interested in people's views on the perceptive difference and or similarities between coincidence and synchronicity, simultaneous occurrences that are meaningfully related, and people's experiences as they may have had them. I thought it would be a good idea to bring those topical areas together under one roof, as I have already come across various posts that briefly flirt with one or the other, but never to a significant degree within the same. Well, honey, come on over to Cool Coincidence on our Facebook page and let's get the commenting to begin. Other concepts you will no doubt find feature prominently within this topic are also included that of causality, insight, extrasensory perception, déjà vu, telepathy, and the argument for whether the mind is separate from the brain and merely operates through it, non-locality theory. There are a great many authors who have come up with different names for similar concepts, which include Arthur Koestler's, I think it's Koestler's, Koestlers, Roots of Coincidence, J.W. Dunn's An Experiment with Time, the work and essays of Carl Jung, who originally coined the term, Horace Walpole's concept of serendipity, or the facility of making happy and unexpected discoveries by chance, Paul Kammerer's law of series, which suggests that random events happen in clusters. Ooh, random events happen in clusters. That sounds like synchronicity chains. Camille Flammarion's book, this one I can't pronounce, L'Inconnu, L'Inconnu, The Unknown, a collection of psychic experiences, where he mentions the now famous story of the author Emily Descamps and the plum pudding incident. I actually think I've heard of that one. This actually goes on for a really long time. I'm going to continue to read it, and if anybody would prefer I not, let me know. Since I am going into it, let me share this link with the folks in the chat room. And Okay. I'm just making notes on the side of these links as well, so I can make sure that everybody has access to them. Folks in chat, here's what I'm reading. Let me make sure I got it all. It ends with an and sign. That's unusual. Nope. That's correct. Okay. Here we go. There you go, chat roomers. And, okay. Many of these authors had differing explanations for the concepts, however. For example, before he committed suicide, Kammerer, in his Law of Series, suggested that there was an as of yet unknown mathematical law or law of seriality. Seriality, that's an interesting word. It's serial, I-T-Y, S-E-I-R-A-L-I-T-Y, where seemingly ridiculous coincidences were nevertheless a law of nature that science hadn't yet been able to explain. He then went on to project the notion that while these kind of events did happen in clusters, they were, however, natural and not causal in nature. Now, while Flammarion's theories generally agree with Kammerer's law of seriality, the serial clustering of coincidences, which in hindsight was an example of a kind of mechanical synchronicity, remembering that Flammarion and Kammerer's ideas predicate those of Jung, who didn't coin the term synchronicity until his essay entitled Synchronicity and a causal connection Principle in 1952. Flammarion does suggest an alternative type of synchronicity that where the mind itself is able to influence the laws of nature. He gives an example of the latter in the following story he recalls in his book, The Unknown. The story goes that while he was writing a book one day, A strong gust of wind carried the pages of the chapters he was working on out of a nearby window and all over the place. It just so happened at the same time that it began to rain. And because of this, he decided not to bother going to pick them up, as he felt it would be in vain. To his surprise, a few days later, a chapter from his book arrived from the local printers. As it transpired, the porter from the local printing office had just so happened to be walking past at that very moment the pages hit the floor, and assumed that he had dropped the papers himself. Because of this, he hastily picked them up before the rain did any damage to them. Remember, this was before 1900. He then placed them in an order book and took them to the printers to be printed off. What was the subject of the chapter? The wind. That's cool. Just one long and two short paragraphs to go. According to the author, Martin Plimmer, in his book Beyond Coincidence, the author and playwright Pearl Binder, together with two other collaborators, once planned to create a satirical novel. They went about this by inventing a situation in which camps for the homeless had been set up in Hyde Park, and had decided on having a refugee Viennese professor called Horvath Dadley, a broken old man with an Hungarian-sounding name. A few days later, they read in the newspaper that a homeless foreign old man had been found wandering alone at night in Hyde Park. I also want to add that as I was writing this very section for the Forum Post, my girlfriend and I got a knock on the door. Though she answered it, she said it was a young homeless man with some papers asking if we could give him some food. Now, I live in rural Northumberland, basically in the middle of nowhere, because it's the least populated country in the whole of England. We have never, in the 10 years of having lived here, ever had a homeless person knock on the door. I actually had to rethink about what had transpired to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Now, going back to the Horvath Natalie fellow, we can see that the three protagonists contributed to this impossible coincidence, or maybe, perhaps, participated in an unconscious recital of the name that they had earlier encountered. There are literally tons of authors' examples within the public sphere of other concepts related to these that I will happily let others contribute if they so wish. Though, have you had any personal experiences, and what are your views on these? There's just one person who responds, so I'm going to go ahead and read that one. And by the way, the person who posted this forum also shared 3 links below that. So thank you. That person, that was actually whoever wrote the Alan M. His handle anyway is Alan Embryo. Very well written, and you can tell that he has dived into the deep end of the topic. The comment or the response in the forum is, it seems to me I have had many of these kinds of coincidental occurrences in the past. Not big important events, just in small ways. I've noticed them when they've occurred, but mostly I've forgotten them now. Another thing I noticed is, and which I now practice, is when I need something and it's difficult or impossible to procure it, I just sit back and wait. But what I want sometimes comes to me out of nowhere, so to speak. Recently, I needed a rubber roofing for my house, EJOVJ. I'm assuming some of those letters are silent. Eve, I'm just going to say that that's Eve. For my house, Eve, was way too expensive for me to buy at the moment. 2 days later, a neighbor brought 2 rolls of this roofing from a friend of his, and sold what I needed of it to me cheap. This kind of event happens to me often, even often enough for me to notice it. Of course, this doesn't always happen, but it seems to me it happens more often than it would if coincidence was just random. I could be misinterpreting all this, of course, but it does make me think about the OP's subject. Lovely. Well, that's fascinating stuff. I hope that we have an opportunity to explore a few more of those. But let me move on to the next part. I think we were up to part 3. If I've played, if I've played this one, I will stop it and go to part 4. So I'll be back in a few.
Act 2, In God We Trust. It's probably no surprise that we got a huge number of coincidence pitches about love, romantic love. A few years ago, after Stephen Lee proposed to his girlfriend Helen, they brought their families together for the first time to celebrate the engagement. Act 3, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? This story comes from Ryan Rosar in Los Angeles.
It happened when I was in college. I was actually pledging a fraternity, and I ran into some of the seniors and on campus, and they were laughing about something. And so one of them tells me the story that had happened to him that day, supposedly, where he gets in the shower, and about 5-10 minutes into his shower, he hears a ping, and he looks down, and sitting on the floor of the shower between his feet is a nickel, and has no idea where this nickel came from or why it's there. Obviously, everyone was making jokes that he had change falling out of his butt, and people were like, "Were you eating dollar bills?" or But anyway, we have our laughs, and I go home and I don't think much about it. The next day, I get in the shower, and 5-10 minutes into my shower, I hear a ding, and I look down, and right between my feet is a quarter. So my first thought was, how did they do it? My thought was, I totally assumed that this must not have really happened to him. That was a setup, and somehow they set this up to happen to me, but I could not figure out how. I was just it had to be a prank, basically.
Oh, that's so smart of you to figure out the whole con.
That's what I assumed.
Right.
But then I go and I talk to him, and I tell him what happened to me, and I'm kind of watching his face for that, the laugh or the glint in his eye of mischief or whatever,
right.
And he just looks kind of sincerely mystified by the fact that this happened to me right after it happened to him. Then a week later, I get in the shower, and 5-10 minutes in, I hear ting, ting, and I look down, and there's about 35 cents between my feet, right? So each time this ting's happening, there's that moment of no way, before I look down, and there's more change. So at this point, obviously my mind's going to some weird places, because you don't want to be the butt change fairy guy, there's somehow there's nothing, no way this story could be good for me. And then no explanation comes, but it doesn't happen for a while, for I want to say probably a month, until one day I'm about to get in the shower, and I reach behind me to scratch my back, and I feel something cold and metal on my back. And I turn around to show turn my back to the mirror.
Right.
And there is a whole pocket full of change stuck to my back.
What do you mean stuck to it? In what way?
Stuck to it. Well, this is what I figured out. So there was no adhesive or anything. It was just impressed into my back. So I figured out what was going on is that I had a bad habit of falling asleep with my pants on, because it was college. I'd nap a lot, and so I'd also sleep with my shirt off because my apartment was really hot. So what was happening was change was falling out of my pockets onto my bed, and I was laying on it, and all that sweat and pressure was just sticking the coins to my back. They're just literally impressed into my back, and it was taking about 5 minutes of water running on it to dislodge them, at which point they're dropping at my feet.
Clearly, I love this story, but I did not see the coincidence in it. Ryan said there was absolutely a coincidence. It happened to that one kid, the senior, and then it happened to him the very next day. I disagree. I think this is probably a common quirk of college boy life. Lounging around, shirtless and groggy, on unclean sofas and beds. Probably half the boys at his college had change stuck to them. I told Ryan so. So I don't think there's any coincidence involved at all.
I do, and because I'll tell you, I've known lots of guys who've lived in pretty squalor conditions, and other than me and that other guy, I've never heard someone, having the change falling from them.
It's just because they're not admitting it. It's just because they're not admitting it. I swear to God. Start asking. Hello? Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Okay, can I come in for a second? I knew Ryan wouldn't actually start asking, so I started asking. Because while Ryan's life is sure to contain many special and unique experiences, I am positive that this is not one of them. So off I went to prove him wrong, because finding others would be so easy. I happen to live in a college town, State College, Pennsylvania, home of Penn State, so I dropped by a frat house. Has this ever happened to you?
No. Never in my life. Never in my life, no.
Never? Wait, so have you never heard of that happening to anybody?
Not even close. Never heard of it.
What about you?
Never ever.
Never?
I mean, I think it'd be a nice icebreaker with women.
Why?
Because in a conversation you could be like, oh, this weird thing happened to me. Yeah, I always got chains stuck to my back or my butt for weeks.
Anyway, lots and lots of no's. I asked whole classes. Has this happened to anyone?
No.
And then we thought, Pennsylvania. It's too cold. Ryan went to college in Southern California. We got to go south. So we sent reporters to the University of Virginia.
All right, have you heard of this happening?
No. I've never heard that before.
No, none of us have heard this. Had this happen.
No.
Nope. First.
To frats at University of North Carolina.
Never heard of that problem, no.
All the way to Miami. We asked at 2 different universities there.
You never had it fall off in the shower?
No, I can't say that it has.
No,
it's never happened.
That's never happened to me.
Never.
I've never heard of that happen to anybody. So now I guess.
Maybe it's a California thing? So we went to UCLA to match the climatological conditions at Ryan's school.
Has it ever happened to you?
No, that doesn't happen. I don't think.
Doesn't happen?
Not a thing. That is not a thing.
So does that mean Ryan was right? It really was a coincidence? Maybe. I asked at one more class in Pennsylvania.
Has this ever happened to any of you?
Oh, it has. Oh, my God. Ladies and gentlemen, Penn State senior Casey Phillips.
It's actually like an ongoing joke in our apartment because there's just change in our shower all the time.
And it's just from you or others in your apartment too?
Just me. Actually, there's change in my shower right now. There's like my roommate texted me today, why is there change in the shower? Because I forgot to take it out, because that happens to me all the time. Like you said, I take naps all the time. Like I pretty much just sleep in naps, like in 2-hour spurts, and I just sleep in my jeans, and I have change in my jeans, and it comes out and it gets in my bed. I figured it out the same way he did. It's that story was eerily similar.
I am so pleased to meet you.
Me too.
Coming up, don't lift that manhole cover. That's 23 letters, by the way. That's in a minute from Chicago Public Radio and Public Radio International when our program continues.
There you have it. Oh, I hope somebody who's listening to this lets us know that happened to them, and they'll go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that somebody else had that happen. Well, I have found a few more stories for you. This one is called Divine Synchronicity in My Life, Magic Thinking. And again, it's one of the stories that came up from a Google search for the word synchronicity, limited to the last week. I thought some people might find this interesting because it proves that things are more than just coincidence. The thing that I'm really curious about is whether others experience this amount of synchronistic events. The other thing I wonder about is how much of this is divine or Babylon-created synchronicity, in parens, spirits using unbaptized people to create events in real life or connections on the internet that have no basis in reality. Boy, these discussions just really run the gamut, don't they? I am not going to try and put all of these events that have ever happened at one time. There have been too many events to document at one sit-down. Let me start with kayaking. Here's a video with some synchronicities to that. Now, obviously, I can't play that kayaking video, and maybe if it's interesting enough, I might pull the audio and share it next week. But for those folks in the chat room, here is the link to the article I'm reading, and feel free to watch that video in 15 minutes after the show. So going back to the article, that's me in the orange kayak a few years back. The first incident of synchronicity I will mention is the kayak. It's curious because I thought about abandoning my faith after being deceived by Mormonism for 5 years. And before I could do that, a movie came out in 2006 about my old career as a rescue swimmer in the Coast Guard, which had so many instances of synchronicity, it appeared to be nothing less than a divine inspiration, which until I saw it in the movie, I never understood what Christians meant when they said the Bible was written by way of inspiration. And one scene has a kayak rescue scene in a cave. There are many more instances of sync that don't just apply to me, but appear to give an understanding of why important events happen. And then it goes on. There's a number of people that comment on that. But that was kind of interesting, and I'm sure that's a 5-minute video. I'm sure that there could be some supplemental information there. Let me read another one for you, and then we'll zip on over to the next part of the American life. The other one that I saw, let's check this one out. It's called Owl House Synchronicity. Small print. Let's see how long it is. It's not too bad. Let me make that print a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is a kind of funny story, and I don't care who believes me. I'm just going to tell it like it happened to me. So a couple of days ago, I ripped the GVG. If anybody knows what GVG is, post it in chat, please. I don't know what that is. Can't remember exactly what happened, just that it wasn't too exciting, and I decided to start doing some deep breathing mid-experience. The breathing sort of ended up in inflating, deflating hyperspace cyclically to the point where it had lost its definition and resolution, like a once-taught balloon being blown up too many times. I opened my eyes and found myself to be very peaceful and calm. The deep breathing, though it derailed the experience, definitely seemed to have exerted a profound tranquilizing effect. I felt energetically aware, yet simply at peace. I went to turn on some music to ride out the still very psychedelic afterglow, but literally, as I was about to, the small battery-powered external speaker I was going to be using died. Now, lately, I've been trying to be really good about not blasting off twice in one day, but I had an itch to listen to some music on DMT, and so I just decided to reload and go for it, this time with headphones. Now, I need to diverge for a quick second so that this will make the most sense to you folks, hopefully. So generally, when I take DMT, I like to stare at, or at the very least be situated in front of, a relatively blank, flat space like a stark wall, or something of the sort. I find this to allow my experience to unfold as smoothly and unaffectedly by the environment as possible. On the other slightly related note, last week, for example, during the afterglow of an experience, I looked at a needle point for a second, and when I looked away, all of the hyperspace was all very needle-pointy. The afterimages of consensual reality, and he's spelling that like it's your senses, consensual reality, can have an impact on the way hyperspace unfolds. This is really nothing new for me, but I suppose somewhat essential to understanding the next part of the story to some degree. So the music I decided to listen to was White Queen by Queen. It has a sort of murky, enchanted forest kind of vibe, and it was foggy and bright, as it could be out my window. So instead of facing the wall, I decided I would look out the window at the bare tree branches in the dense fog. I exhaled my hit. Oh, he's smoking something. Okay. I exhaled my hit, put on my headphones, cued the music, and closed my eyes. As the song gently commenced with its sweet, descending guitar harmonies, I instantly found myself enveloped in what I had first thought was a cuckoo clock, but there was none of that mechanical cogs, gears, and no cuckoo, so I thought it looked like the inside of a birdhouse, and I then revised my observation that it seemed to be like an owl's house. I'm not entirely sure what made me think this, but I felt perhaps it had something to do with the elegant curvature that made up the space. It had a very warm, woody vibe. It was just so quaint and lovely. I actually do remember seeing a bird's feet and feathers, but never got a good glimpse of the full bird that they were attached to. Anywho, here's the funny part. That day, I even remember going on chat and describing it as an owl house and all that, and figured that was pretty much the end of that. Well, then yesterday, a few days after this happened, I was outside the window I had been looking out from my bedroom the few days before, smoking DMT, and what I saw shocked me. What was directly across from me was not only a birdhouse, but it was a birdhouse that was carved out to look like an owl. So now I address some obvious issues. I want to note that while the owl house is outside in front of my house, I actually have no physical view of it from my bedroom. Secondly, I know this whole thing is kind of muddy considering that the birdhouse is outside my house, but I have never recalled seeing it, nor did I recognize it at all as being familiar. I have no idea how long it's actually been there. So was this subconscious? Could be. Was it just the eeriest of coincidences? Could be. What was a legitimate connection between my vision and this birdhouse that I was consciously unaware of? Possibly. All I know is that amidst the confusion of laying eyes on that owl-shaped birdhouse, my heart was singing. That's bizarre and cool. Let me log that article so I can share it with the folks in chat while I begin the next segment of the series. Let's see, we just played 5. I am going to play number 6 here, and we may still have time for 7, or I might have to pull that over to the next show. This one is about 5 minutes long, so I'll see you in a few.
So, last September, I was living in Roswell, New Mexico, and I had woken up in jail for the last time.
This is Etta Thorderson. When this happened just 6 months ago, she was 20 years old, on drugs, hanging out with street kids. Her mom offered to buy her a bus ticket to Washington State to go to rehab. Etta said yes. She took her dog and got on the bus. In Los Angeles, there was a stopover at the depot. And this guy comes up to her while she's waiting in line to get food. She's got $2, just enough for some French fries. The guy starts asking her questions about her dog.
And he starts asking me other random questions like, what are you doing, where are you going? And then he asked me, are you from Alaska? And I was like, yeah, I am actually. And then he asked me, is your mom named Meg? And I was like, yeah, she is. And he's like, oh, well, I'm Chris. I'm your father. I met you 10 years ago. And I was like, oh, holy
Etta had only seen her father that one time, briefly, when she was 11.
And then he pulls out a big wad of money and, he pays for my food. And then he hands me $40. And it's like, don't say I never gave you nothing, and walked away.
I'm shocked by this story. And he didn't, that was it? You didn't see him again? He didn't?
No. You could tell he felt bad.
Did you expect something more to happen? Did you think,
yeah, I really thought we were going to go sit down and eat together, and I was going to lay out my whole life story for him, and he was going to explain his life and where he's been. I was kind of looking forward to that, but then it didn't happen. Mostly I want to study his face for longer, just because I've seen him twice, and I still can't really remember what he looks like.
Do you regret not pursuing him in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. In the moment, I was so sick. I just really couldn't comprehend. It wasn't until I got on the bus that I was kind of just why didn't I run after him? I just spent my whole life wondering about this man, and, the chance to talk to him was put right in front of my face, and I didn't really understand that at the time, and I let it go.
Emiliano Garcia Sarnoff also hadn't seen his father in many years, since he was 7 or 8 years old. He lived in California, but was visiting a national park in Mexico with his mother when he was 18. They hiked to the top of a pyramid there. The whole place was sort of off the beaten track.
We're walking along, and there some people passed in front of us, and my mom said, "Oh my God, Raul?" And then she turned to me and said, "That's your father. That's your dad." And it was.
Also, coincidentally, it was Father's Day.
So I ended up sort of embarrassingly breaking down, crying on that pyramid. It was a really emotional moment for me. My father definitely, his absence meant a lot to me. And we said, yeah, we're going to, stay in contact. And after they said bye, they left. And he came running back up the hill about 20 minutes later. And, you could hear him panting. And he said, "Emiliano, I just want to say I'm sorry that I didn't stay in touch and that I love you." And he turned and went back down the hill.
Emiliano's story goes the way Etta wishes hers had gone. After a rocky few years, he and his father did get to know each other and each other's families. Emiliano had a son who now had a grandfather. Emiliano's father had left him when he was a baby, but when his father died a couple of years ago, Emiliano was there at the hospital. They'd had a real relationship. And that never would have happened, Emiliano said, if he hadn't seen him that day at the pyramid.
Walking down that pyramid, I was talking out loud to myself, and I was saying, this is one strong memory I have, is I was saying, don't forget, I was just sort of getting angry with my future self, which I knew would rationalize this event, because I had a very distinct sense that I had felt that this was definitely a miracle. Something had intervened and brought us together. You don't just run into your father on top of a pyramid. So I think I was a believer for about a week. And then that very pause, that brings us to Act 5. What are the chances? In order to let a good coincidence live a long and healthy life, to get told and retold and take its rightful place in the narrative of your life, sometimes you have to stop yourself from thinking it all the way through, why it happened really. Because the fact is, any statistician will probably rain on your parade. Will tell you these things happen a lot more often than you think. But a good coincidence is like a good magic trick. When you see one, a struggle ensues, instantaneously, between the thrill of the apparent miracle and the urge to debunk it.
For those of you who are in chat, here's the link to the final story I'll be reading for this evening. This is a really interesting one. It says, photo taken of father shows his missing daughter. Michael Dick hadn't seen his daughter Lisa for over 10 years. This was since he had separated from his first wife. Determined to make contact with her again, Michael traveled to Sudbury, where she had last been known to be living together with his 2 other daughters. His search in Sudbury reached a dead end, so he wondered if the local newspaper could help. He contacted the Suffolk Free Press, and they photographed him and published an appeal for the next edition in their paper. As luck would have it, Lisa was spotted in the photo of that article a few days later, and she contacted Michael. And now the story goes on, but the bottom line is, the picture that he took to find her, she's in the background. And I've listed that link in chat. Well, this has been one heck of a fun day for me, I got to tell you. I hope you enjoyed these stories as much as I have. And I will see you all back here next week for another edition of Cool Coincidence. Until then, please visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/coolcoincidence, or send us an email at coolcoincidence@gmail.com. I'll see you next week.